The snow was turning red, not because the storm had stopped, because someone was bleeding. The young woman stood at the foot of the marble staircase, her worn cloak wrapped tightly around the tiny child pressed against her chest. The baby's cries were almost swallowed by the icy wind that swept through the courtyard. Across from her stood every member of the Ashcombe family, the same people who had once laughed as she begged for mercy. Now, no one laughed. The old countess stared as if she'd seen a ghost. Lord Victor Ashcombe's face had gone completely pale. Even the servants, who once refused to look her in the eye, lowered their heads. Then the royal steward stepped forward, unrolled a scroll sealed with the Duke's black crest, and spoke loudly enough for the entire estate to hear. By decree of His Grace, he paused, the lands, titles, vineyards, mills, forests, and manor of Ashcombe are hereby transferred to Lady Eleanor Ashcombe, lawful Duchess of Blackhaven. Silence. Absolute silence. Victor stumbled backward. No. His voice cracked. No. That's impossible. The steward continued reading. Furthermore, all previous residents shall vacate the property immediately. The Countess grabbed the scroll. There must be some mistake. There is none. The steward didn't even blink. The Duke signed it himself. Eleanor looked at the mansion. The same front doors. The same frozen fountain. The same courtyard where she had nearly died. Then she looked down at the little boy holding her hand. He couldn't have been older than 6 months. He smiled. He had no idea this was the place where his life had almost ended, before it ever truly began. Victor suddenly dropped to his knees. Eleanor, I'm begging you. The woman he once threw into the snow looked at him without anger, without satisfaction, without revenge, just silence. Because some wounds become too deep for hatred, they simply become memories. The little boy reached toward the mansion. Mama, is this our home? Eleanor closed her eyes. For a brief second, she remembered another winter, another snowfall, another desperate cry. The day they tried to erase both of them forever. But before I tell you how a homeless pregnant woman became the Duchess every noble feared, take 1 second to subscribe, because stories like this remind us that the people everyone abandons today may become the ones history remembers tomorrow. Now, let's go back to the beginning. 8 months earlier, the first slap came before Eleanor even finished speaking. You lied to us. Lady Margaret Ashcombe's jeweled ring split Eleanor's lip. Blood landed on the polished dining room floor. I didn't lie. Her voice trembled. I only asked for silence. Victor didn't even look at her. He kept drinking his wine, as though watching someone else's punishment. The grand dining hall glowed with candlelight, crystal chandeliers, silver plates, roasted pheasant, fresh bread, enough food to feed an entire village. Yet the woman carrying the Ashcombe heir hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. Margaret circled her slowly. When my son married you, we believed you were useful. Eleanor lowered her eyes. She had grown up believing kindness mattered more than wealth. Her father had been the village physician. Her mother taught children to read. Neither had titles, neither had fortunes, but both had taught her dignity. She hadn't understood that dignity had little value inside noble houses. Victor finally spoke. Tell them. Eleanor swallowed. The physician confirmed. She gently placed a hand over her stomach. I'm expecting. No smile appeared. No congratulations. Nothing. Margaret laughed first, then everyone else joined. One cousin nearly spilled his wine. Victor shook his head. Convenient timing. What? You expect me to believe that's my child? The words hit harder than the slap. She stared at him. You know it is. I know nothing. You were away for months, Margaret added. We have no proof. Eleanor could barely breathe. You sent him away. You arranged those diplomatic visits. Victor shrugged. And? You think anyone here will believe a servant's daughter over an ashcombe? The room erupted with quiet laughter. A servant's daughter. Never mind that she'd managed the estate accounts. Never mind that she'd stopped them from bankruptcy twice. Never mind that she'd sacrificed everything after marriage. To them, her birth mattered more than her actions. Margaret placed a leather pouch on the table. Coins clinked. There. Enough money to disappear. Eleanor stared at it. You want me to leave? We want the embarrassment gone. Victor finally met her eyes. I've already arranged another marriage. Her heart stopped. What? The daughter of Lord Harrow. The alliance is worth 3 counties. His expression never changed. You served your purpose. Every word stripped away another illusion. This wasn't simply betrayal. This had been planned. Long before today. Long before the pregnancy. Long before she even knew. You never loved me. Victor smiled. I admired your handwriting. More laughter. Something inside Eleanor broke. Not loudly. Quietly. The kind of breaking no one notices until nothing remains. She stood. Very slowly. If I leave with my child. Margaret stepped closer. There is no child. There will never be one. For the first time, real fear entered Eleanor's eyes. You wouldn't. Margaret smiled. Oh dear, you still think this is a family. That night, everything changed. No carriage, no escort, no supplies. 2 servants dragged Eleanor through the front gates while snow buried the road. She screamed. Not for herself, for the baby. I'm 7 months pregnant. One servant hesitated. The older one whispered, if we refuse, we'll be next. The gates slammed shut. Iron against iron. Like the sound of a prison. Eleanor pounded until her hands bled. Victor. No answer. Only music drifting from inside. The family had resumed dinner. Behind those walls, people laughed. Outside, the temperature kept falling. Snow soaked through her shoes. The wind sliced across the empty road. Every step became harder than the last. She held her stomach. Stay with me. I know you're scared. So am I. Hours passed. No houses. No travelers. Nothing. Then, pain. Sharp. Violent. She collapsed beside an old oak tree. No, please, not now. The contractions were beginning. Too early. Much too early. She looked toward the dark road. No one. She screamed anyway. Her voice disappeared into the blizzard. Minutes later, hoofbeats. At first, she thought she imagined them. Then they grew louder. A black carriage emerged through the snow. No family crest. No banners. Only 4 enormous horses pushing through the storm. The carriage slowed. Stopped. The door opened. A tall man stepped into the snow. His coat was dark, his face partly hidden beneath the hood. He looked at Eleanor, then at the blood staining the snow beneath her. His voice was calm. Who did this to you? Eleanor tried to answer. Instead, she collapsed unconscious. The stranger caught her before her face struck the frozen ground. As he lifted her into the carriage, one of his guards whispered urgently, Your Grace, if the capital discovers you've delayed your journey. The man cut him off with just 3 words. Save her first. Neither the guard nor Eleanor had any idea that the stranger who had just carried her out of the snow was the one man every noble house in the kingdom feared. When Eleanor opened her eyes, she expected to see snow. Instead, she saw sunlight. Warm golden light spilled across a ceiling made of carved oak instead of cracked stone. A fire crackled nearby. Someone had tucked thick wool blankets around her shoulders. For a moment, she simply stared, wondering if she'd already died. Then panic hit. My baby. She tried to sit up too quickly, and a sharp pain shot through her body. A gentle voice answered before anyone else could. Easy. An older woman hurried to her bedside. Your child is still waiting to meet you. If you tear your stitches, neither of you will enjoy the reunion. Eleanor froze. My child. The woman smiled with the kind of smile only someone who had spent a lifetime delivering babies could manage. A healthy little boy. Eleanor covered her mouth. No. Tears spilled before she could stop them. He lived. He fought very hard. So did his mother. The older woman reached into a cradle beside the fireplace. Wrapped in a deep blue blanket lay the tiniest face Eleanor had ever seen. His little fists opened and closed as if he were trying to grab hold of the world itself. The moment he was placed into her arms, everything else disappeared. Not the betrayal, not the pain, not the memory of freezing in the snow, but none of it mattered as much as the tiny heartbeat resting against her chest. She kissed his forehead over and over. I thought I'd lost you. The baby yawned. The nurse chuckled. He seems determined to prove everyone wrong already. Eleanor laughed through tears. It was the first genuine laugh she'd managed in months. Then she noticed something. This room. She looked around. It wasn't a village cottage. The furniture was handmade from expensive timber. The curtains were thick velvet. Fresh flowers stood by the window despite the middle of winter. She turned back to the nurse. Where am I? Blackhaven Manor. The name meant nothing to her. Who brought me here? The nurse hesitated. A gentleman. What gentleman? I'm afraid that answer belongs to him. Almost on cue, there was a knock at the door. The room became strangely quiet. The nurse immediately straightened her posture. Even the servants outside stopped talking. Someone important had arrived. The door opened. The same tall man from the snow stepped inside. Without the storm hiding his face, Eleanor finally saw him clearly. He wasn't old as she'd imagined. Perhaps 35. Dark hair touched with the first hints of silver at the temples. A faint scar crossed one eyebrow. His expression carried the calm confidence of someone who had survived more battles than conversations. He looked first at the baby, then at Eleanor. How are you feeling? She tightened her hold on her son. You saved us. I arrived in time. You did much more than that. He dismissed the gratitude with a small wave of his hand. The physician deserves the credit. Silence lingered between them. Finally, Eleanor asked the question that had haunted her since waking. Why? He looked almost surprised. Why what? Why stop? You didn't know me. You had somewhere else to be. You could have ridden past. He glanced toward the fire before answering. My mother once told me something. If you have the power to save a life and choose comfort instead, you've surrendered a piece of your own humanity. He said it so simply that Eleanor believed every word. For the first time in months, she met someone's eyes without fear. I don't even know your name. He smiled faintly. Adrian. Only Adrian. Nothing more. No title. No explanation. She nodded. I'm Eleanor. I know. You do. The village physician identified you after you lost consciousness. He didn't mention the Ashcombe family. Didn't ask questions. Didn't force her to relive the nightmare. He simply looked at the child. And him. She looked down at the tiny face. I haven't chosen a name yet. Adrian thought for a moment. What about Thomas? Why Thomas? It means twin. She frowned. But he doesn't have one. No. Adrian looked directly at the little boy. He was born beside death. Sometimes that makes a person stronger than those born beside comfort. Eleanor whispered the name. Thomas. The baby stretched as if approving the decision. She smiled. Thomas it is. But none. Underscore. The weeks that followed felt almost unreal. No one treated Eleanor like a burden. No servant rolled their eyes when she entered a room. No one reminded her she had been born without noble blood. Blackhaven Manor moved with quiet discipline. The staff respected one another. Meals were shared. Workers laughed. Even the stable boys addressed elderly servants with kindness. It didn't feel like a palace. It felt like a home. Adrian, however, remained a mystery. Some mornings he disappeared before sunrise. Other nights he returned long after everyone had gone to bed. Sometimes she heard soldiers arriving, sometimes judges, occasionally merchants. People from every corner of the kingdom came to speak with him, yet no one ever explained why. One afternoon, Eleanor found herself walking through the library while Thomas slept peacefully nearby. She had always loved books. Her father believed reading was the only wealth thieves could never steal. She reached toward a leather-bound volume, then noticed Adrian standing by the window. "You read history?" he asked. "I read everything." He handed her another book. "You'll like this one better." She glanced at the cover. "Estate Management and Agricultural Reform." She laughed. "That's not exactly exciting. It depends who's reading." She opened it. Within minutes, she forgot he was even in the room. Margins were filled with handwritten notes, corrections, ideas, calculations. She looked up. "You wrote these?" He nodded. "Half the kingdom wastes fertile land. You noticed that? I manage estates." She smiled. "So do I." He looked amused. "I've heard." "From who?" "The accountant you replaced." Her eyebrows lifted. "He spoke highly of you." Eleanor blinked. "That has to be the first kind thing anyone from Ashcombe ever said." Adrian watched her carefully. "You still think about them?" "I try not to. But yes." She closed the book. "I keep wondering what I did wrong." "You married someone who valued status over character. That isn't your failure, it's his." She looked away. "Some days I believe that. And the other days? I remember how easily they threw us away." Adrian's voice became quieter. "Eleanor, the people who betray us often convince us we deserved it." "That doesn't make it true." She didn't answer, because deep down, she still wasn't sure she believed him. Far away, inside Ashcombe Estate, winter had become something much colder. Debt notices covered Victor's desk. Another shipment of wine had failed. The northern bridge had collapsed. 3 tenants had abandoned their farms. Tax collectors kept arriving. Nothing seemed to go right anymore. Lady Margaret slammed another letter onto the table. "We're losing money every week." Victor rubbed his forehead. "The marriage to Lady Catherine will solve it." "When?" "Soon." Margaret narrowed her eyes. The Harrows delayed the engagement again. Victor looked uncomfortable. "They're reconsidering." "Reconsidering?" "The rumors." "What rumors?" He didn't answer immediately. Finally he muttered, "People have started asking questions about Eleanor." Margaret scoffed. "She's probably dead." Victor stared into the fireplace. "I know." Yet somehow, he couldn't stop remembering the look on Eleanor's face as the gates closed. At night, he convinced himself she'd survived. During the day, he hoped she hadn't. Because if she had, one day she might tell people exactly what happened. Months passed. The snow melted. The forests turned green again. Thomas grew stronger every week. His first laugh echoed through Blackhaven Manor and had every servant smiling. Even Adrian couldn't hide his grin when the little boy grabbed his finger with surprising determination. "He's stronger than he looks," Adrian said. "He gets that from his mother," the nurse replied. Eleanor overheard them and smiled quietly. For the first time since her marriage, she felt useful again. She reorganized Blackhaven's accounts, reduced unnecessary spending, negotiated fairer contracts with nearby villages, expanded grain storage before spring floods arrived. Within 3 months, revenues increased dramatically. The steward could hardly believe the numbers. "I've never seen records this organized." Adrian only smiled. "I expected as much." One evening the steward approached Adrian privately. "Your Grace." Eleanor happened to be walking down the corridor. She froze. "Your Grace." The steward realized too late that she'd heard him. Silence filled the hallway. Eleanor slowly turned toward Adrian. "You're—" Her voice barely worked. "Grace?" The steward looked horrified. "Forgive me." Adrian sighed softly. "It appears the secret has become difficult to keep." Eleanor stared at him. "The Duke?" He nodded once. "Yes." "The Duke of Blackhaven?" "Yes." She shook her head in disbelief. "You let me believe you were simply Adrian. I preferred that." "Why?" "Because everyone else sees the title before they see the man. And you? You only saw the stranger who stopped his carriage." She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "You mean, the man every noble fears has been eating breakfast with me while Thomas throws porridge at his sleeves?" Adrian laughed. "For the record, he has excellent aim." For the first time since learning the truth, Eleanor laughed too. But neither of them noticed the royal messenger galloping toward Blackhaven through the evening mist. The sealed letter he carried would force Adrian to return to court and place Eleanor directly in the path of the family that believed she had died beneath the winter snow. The royal messenger arrived just before dawn. The pounding of horse hooves echoed through the quiet courtyard of Blackhaven Manor, waking servants before the sun had even risen. The rider dismounted in one swift motion, his cloak dusted with the last traces of winter, and presented a sealed letter bearing the king's crest. Every servant who saw it stepped aside. Royal summons were never ordinary. Adrian broke the seal, read the letter once, then folded it carefully. The steward studied his face. "Bad news, Your Grace?" Adrian looked toward the nursery window where Eleanor was rocking Thomas back to sleep. "It depends on who you're asking." An hour later, Eleanor found him saddling his horse. "You're leaving?" He nodded. "I have to appear before the Royal Council." "For how long?" "I don't know." She tried to smile. "We managed before you." "Blackhaven did." His eyes softened. "I'm not certain I did." She looked away before he could notice the color rising to her cheeks. Months ago, Adrian had been a stranger. Now his absence already made the manor feel quieter. Thomas reached both hands toward him from Eleanor's arms. Adrian chuckled. "So this is how I know who the favorite is." Thomas answered by grabbing the Duke's finger with surprising strength. "He's asking you not to go," Eleanor said. "I know." Adrian kissed the child's forehead. "I'll be back before he forgets my face." Then he mounted his horse. Just before leaving, he looked back. "Eleanor." "Yes?" "No matter what you hear while I'm gone, trust me." She frowned. "What am I supposed to hear?" He only smiled. "You'll know when the time comes." Then he rode away. The capital buzzed with rumors. The Duke of Blackhaven rarely attended court unless something serious demanded his presence. By the time Adrian entered the council chamber, nearly every high-ranking noble had already taken a seat. The king wasted no time. "Blackhaven." Adrian bowed. "Your Majesty, we've received petitions from 3 counties. They all say the same thing." Adrian waited. The king leaned forward. "They claim Lord Victor Ashcombe has illegally seized tenant lands, altered inheritance records, and concealed debts from the crown." Several nobles exchanged uneasy glances. The king continued. "And there is another accusation." Adrian's expression remained calm. "A woman. His lawful wife disappeared. They claim she abandoned the marriage." The king's voice grew colder. "Others claim she was forced into the snow while carrying his child." Silence filled the chamber. Adrian finally spoke. "The second claim is true." Every head turned. "You know this." "I witnessed the aftermath." The king's eyes narrowed. "You have evidence." "I have the woman." The chamber erupted. One lord stood so quickly his chair crashed onto the marble floor. "Impossible." "She survived?" Another whispered. "I heard she froze to death." Adrian waited for the room to settle. Then he spoke with quiet certainty. "Not only did she survive, she gave birth to a healthy son." The king's face darkened. "If this is true..." Ashcombe has committed crimes against both the crown and his own bloodline. One elderly judge cleared his throat. Your Majesty, there is another complication. He placed several old documents on the table. They concern Lady Eleanor's late father. Adrian immediately recognized the family name. The judge continued. Before his death, Dr. William Hart secretly purchased the mortgage on Ashcombe Estate. The room became silent again. The documents were never presented because he died unexpectedly. The king frowned. What became of them? They passed to his only legal heir. The judge looked directly at Adrian. Eleanor, for the first time all morning. Even Adrian looked surprised. The judge spread the papers across the table. The Ashcombes believed they owned the estate. They did not. They had merely borrowed against it. And because the debt was never repaid. He looked toward the king. The entire estate legally belongs to Eleanor. The room exploded with disbelief. Hundreds of miles away, Eleanor knew nothing. She spent the morning hanging fresh laundry with the servants, while Thomas slept in a basket beneath the old oak tree. One of the younger maids laughed. You know, you still help with chores. Eleanor smiled. I've never believed honest work makes anyone smaller. The maid shook her head. Most ladies would. Then most ladies are missing out. The women laughed together. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt completely at peace, until a carriage rolled into the courtyard. Royal colors. The steward hurried outside. A royal official stepped down carrying a velvet case. Lady Eleanor Hart. She frowned. Yes. He bowed deeply. I bring greetings from His Majesty. Every servant stopped working. The official opened the velvet case. Inside rested a signet ring bearing the crest of Blackhaven. The king requests your presence at court. Eleanor blinked. There must be some mistake. There is none. The official smiled. In fact, His Majesty believes several mistakes are finally about to be corrected. The capital overwhelmed her. Towering stone walls, crowded marketplaces, carriages moving in every direction. Thomas stared with wide eyes from his mother's arms. When they entered the royal palace, Eleanor instinctively slowed. She remembered the Ashcombe estate, its endless halls, its whispered insults, its polished cruelty. This place looked even grander, yet somehow it didn't frighten her. Perhaps because she no longer arrived begging for acceptance. She arrived carrying her son. The chamber doors opened. Dozens of nobles turned. Whispers spread immediately. That's her. She lived. She's younger than I expected. Look. She brought the child. Victor Ashcombe was already inside. The moment he saw Eleanor, every trace of color disappeared from his face. His lips parted. He actually took a step backward. No. Lady Margaret looked as though she'd seen someone rise from the grave. It can't be. Eleanor held Thomas a little tighter. Months earlier, those same people had watched her disappear into a blizzard without mercy. Now, they couldn't even meet her eyes. The king addressed the room. Lady Eleanor. She bowed. Your Majesty, you have suffered greatly. I intend to ensure the law answers for it. Victor suddenly interrupted. She's lying. The king's gaze snapped toward him. You claim she wasn't expelled. Victor hesitated. We merely asked her to leave. A captain of the royal guard stepped forward. We interviewed 7 servants. They all gave sworn testimony. They watched your household throw a pregnant woman into a winter storm. Victor's shoulders sagged. Margaret remained defiant. She had no proof the child belonged to our family. Eleanor finally spoke. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. My husband knew exactly whose child I carried. The room fell silent. She looked directly at Victor. You looked me in the eyes. You watched me place your son's hand over our baby's heartbeat. You smiled. Then you arranged another marriage before I had even reached the front gate." Victor couldn't answer, because every word was true. The king raised one hand. The courtroom became silent again. "The investigation into Ashcombe Estate is complete." The royal judge stepped forward, carrying a stack of documents. The estate accumulated unlawful debts. Tenant contracts were forged. Inheritance taxes were concealed. And finally, he lifted the oldest document. "The mortgage legally belongs to Lady Eleanor Hart." Gasps echoed through the chamber. The judge continued, "Therefore, under the laws of the Crown, ownership of Ashcombe Estate passes immediately to its lawful heir." The king looked toward Adrian. Blackhaven. Adrian stepped forward. Without taking his eyes off Eleanor, he accepted the royal decree. Then, to the astonishment of every noble in the room, he walked directly toward her. He stopped only inches away. His voice was gentle enough that only those closest could hear. "When I found you in the snow, I promised myself no one would ever have the chance to abandon you again." Eleanor felt tears gathering before she realized why. Adrian continued, "I protected you because it was right. I came to admire you because of your courage. But somewhere between Thomas's first smile and watching you rebuild an estate that wasn't even yours, I realized something." He drew a slow breath. "I no longer wanted Blackhaven to be merely your refuge. I wanted it to be your home." He knelt. The courtroom collectively held its breath. Adrian removed a small velvet box from his coat. Inside rested a ring unlike any Eleanor had ever seen. Not oversized, not covered in jewels. Elegant, simple, strong, exactly like the man holding it. "Eleanor Hart, I cannot erase the winter that nearly stole your life. But if you'll allow me, I would be honored to spend every spring, every summer, every autumn, and every winter beside you, as your husband." Thomas suddenly laughed from Eleanor's arms. The sound broke the tension. Even several guards smiled. Eleanor looked down at the little boy. Then back at Adrian. Months ago, she had begged strangers for mercy. Now, the kindest man she had ever known was asking for something instead. She reached out with trembling fingers. "Yes, I'd be honored." The courtroom erupted into applause. But one family stood frozen. Victor finally understood. The woman he had discarded like she was nothing was about to become the Duchess of Blackhaven. And with that title, everything he thought he owned was about to slip through his fingers. The wedding was deliberately small, no parade, no endless procession of nobles trying to gain favor, no extravagant celebration meant to impress the kingdom. That was Adrian's choice. And, to Eleanor's surprise, it was exactly what she wanted too. They exchanged their vows in the chapel overlooking Blackhaven's eastern valley, where wildflowers had begun pushing through the last patches of melting snow. Only a handful of trusted friends, the household staff, and the king himself attended. Thomas, dressed in a tiny cream-colored outfit, stitched by the manor's seamstress, stole the ceremony without even trying. Just as Adrian slipped the ring onto Eleanor's finger, Thomas let out a loud, joyful laugh. The entire chapel burst into laughter. Even the king wiped away a tear. "Well," he said, smiling, "I'd say the young man approves." For the first time in a very long time, Eleanor's laughter wasn't hiding pain. It came from peace. 3 weeks later, the royal decree was ready. A column of mounted guards rode toward Ashcombe Estate. Behind them traveled the royal steward. Behind him came Adrian and Eleanor. Thomas slept peacefully in his mother's arms, unaware that he was returning to the place where his life had almost ended before it truly began. As the gates appeared in the distance, Eleanor's heartbeat quickened. She recognized every stone, every window, every tree lining the road. The nightmares she thought she'd buried began whispering again. Adrian noticed immediately. Without saying a word, he reached across the carriage and gently took her hand. "You don't have to prove anything today." She looked at him. "What if I can't do this?" He smiled softly. "You already have." The gates slowly opened. Servants lined the courtyard. Many of them were different from those who had lived there months before. Some had remained. Others had quietly left after witnessing the family's cruelty. Those who stayed lowered their heads, not to the Ashcombs, but to Eleanor. Some were crying. One elderly gardener stepped forward, tears filling his eyes. "My lady, I prayed every day you had survived." Eleanor recognized him immediately. Old Samuel. He had once secretly left bread outside her bedroom door when Lady Margaret ordered the kitchen not to serve her dinner. She embraced him. "You were kind to me when you had nothing to gain." Samuel broke down. "I couldn't save you." "You tried." She squeezed his hand. Sometimes kindness is the only rescue a person can give. Then, the front doors opened. Victor, Lady Margaret, several relatives, the family who had once believed themselves untouchable. And suddenly, the moment from the beginning of our story arrived. The snow had disappeared. Spring flowers surrounded the courtyard, yet Eleanor could still see that terrible winter every time she looked at those stone steps. The royal steward stepped forward. He unrolled the parchment sealed with Blackhaven's crest. His voice echoed across the estate. "By decree of His Majesty, and by lawful judgment of the Royal Council, the lands, vineyards, mills, forests, manor house, and all attached properties of Ashcombe Estate are hereby transferred to their legal owner." He looked toward Eleanor. "Her Grace, Duchess Eleanor of Blackhaven." Silence. The same crushing silence. Victor staggered backward exactly as he had in the opening moments of this story. "No," his voice cracked. "There has to be some mistake." The steward calmly handed him copies of the legal documents. "There is none. The debt your family ignored for years belonged to Dr. William Hart. Eleanor inherited his claim. The Crown has confirmed it." Lady Margaret grabbed the papers with trembling hands. "This is absurd. We are Ashcombs. We've lived here for generations," the steward answered, without raising his voice. "The law recognizes ownership, not pride." Victor slowly looked toward Eleanor. She stood where they had once forced her to kneel. Only this time, she wasn't shivering, she wasn't begging, she wasn't alone. Adrian stood beside her. Thomas rested safely against her shoulder. Victor swallowed hard. Then, to the shock of everyone watching, he dropped to his knees. "Eleanor, please. We were wrong. We can fix this." She stared at him. This was the man she once loved. The man whose approval she had spent years chasing. The man who watched servants throw his pregnant wife into a blizzard. Now he couldn't even look her in the eye. "I know I failed you. I know I was weak. But don't take our home. Our family built this." Eleanor spoke quietly. "My father bought this estate before he died. He believed honest work mattered more than titles. You called him a peasant." Victor lowered his head. "I know. You mocked my mother. I know. You threw your own child into the snow before he was even born." Victor began crying. Real tears. Not for Eleanor. Not for Thomas. For himself. For everything he had lost. And that realization settled heavily in Eleanor's heart. Some people mistake consequences for cruelty, but consequences simply arrive when excuses run out. Lady Margaret stepped forward next. Unlike her son, she refused to bow. "You think you've won." She looked around the courtyard. "You'll always be a physician's daughter pretending to be nobility." Several guards immediately reached for their swords. Adrian raised one hand. "No." He looked calmly at Margaret. "Let her finish." Margaret sneered. "She'll never belong." Before Eleanor could answer, one voice came from the crowd, then another, then another. It was the servants, the stable hands, the cooks, the gardeners, the maids. One by one they stepped forward. "We'll serve the Duchess. She treated us like people. She knows every worker's name. She earned this." Old Samuel smiled through tears. "A title is inherited. Respect is earned." For the first time in her life, Lady Margaret had nothing left to say. Underscore. The steward cleared his throat. "There remains one final matter." Everyone turned toward him. "Her Grace now has full legal authority over the future of Ashcombe Estate, including its current residents." The entire courtyard waited. Some expected revenge. Others expected exile. After all, that was exactly what had been done to her. Eleanor looked around slowly. She saw frightened servants, children peeking from windows, stable boys who had committed no crime, kitchen workers simply trying to survive. She also saw Victor, broken, defeated. Lady Margaret, still proud, still angry, still unwilling to admit the truth. Finally, Eleanor spoke. "Every servant keeps their position."
Confused whispers spread immediately.
They've already suffered enough,
She continued.
every tenant farmer keeps their land.
More surprised faces. No family will lose their home because of someone else's greed. She turned toward the royal steward.
As for Lord Victor Ashcombe,
She paused.
"He will leave this estate before sunset." Gasps rippled across the courtyard. "And Lady Margaret?" the steward asked. Eleanor looked directly at the woman who had ordered her into the snow. "She leaves with him." Margaret laughed bitterly. "So you're throwing us out?" Eleanor slowly shook her head. "No, I am giving you exactly what you gave me. A chance to discover who you are without a mansion protecting your name." As the guards escorted the Ashcombes away, Victor stopped beside Thomas. The little boy smiled at him. He didn't know this man. He knew nothing of betrayal, nothing of hatred, nothing of pride, only curiosity. Victor whispered, "I'm sorry," whether he was speaking to the child or to the life he had destroyed. No one knew. Eleanor simply held her son a little closer. Then she watched Victor disappear beyond the gates he had once slammed shut behind her. This time, they closed quietly, not with anger, with finality. The months that followed transformed Ashcombe Estate. The lavish banquets ended. The wasted money disappeared. Tenant families were treated fairly. A school was built using one of the abandoned guest houses. The old physician's office was restored in honor of Eleanor's father, providing free care to nearby villages. Widows who had been forced from their cottages were invited back. Workers received proper wages. For the first time in decades, the estate flourished because people mattered more than appearances. One evening, Eleanor stood in the same courtyard where her life had nearly ended. Thomas, now taking his first unsteady steps, chased butterflies across the grass, while Adrian followed close behind, pretending he couldn't quite catch him. Their laughter echoed against the stone walls. Eleanor closed her eyes. She could still remember the freezing wind, the terror, the loneliness. Those memories would never completely disappear, but they no longer controlled her. Adrian walked over, carrying Thomas on his shoulders. "What are you thinking about?" She smiled. "That winter. And spring." He nodded. "They're both part of the same story." Thomas reached down and wrapped tiny arms around Eleanor's neck. She kissed his cheek, then looked toward the horizon, where sunlight covered the fields that had once seemed so cold. Sometimes people believe the greatest victory is revenge. It isn't. The greatest victory is building the life someone else tried to convince you that you would never have. A safe home, a loving family, people who choose kindness even after experiencing cruelty. That is how cycles of pain finally end. And perhaps that's why the old gardener smiled as he watched the Duchess walk through the fields. Because the woman who had once been thrown into the snow had become the reason so many others would never be abandoned again. If this story touched your heart, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs the reminder that your worst chapter doesn't have to become your final one. Sometimes life changes in a single season, and sometimes the people the world leaves out in the cold return, not seeking revenge, but carrying enough grace to change everyone around them. We'll see you in the next story.